Good morning to everyone in Latin America, US, and good afternoon for everyone in Europe. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. I'm here with my colleagues from BMS Group, DLA Piper Chile and DLA Piper Colombia. We have organized this webinar together. So for those who don't know me, my name is Marcela Hill and I am a partner of insurance reinsurance at Campos Melo Advogados in Brazil, and I'm also responsible for the Brazil desk at Campos Melo, based in DLA Piper's London office. Before I introduce the speakers today, I just want to go through some housekeeping information. So we're using a platform that allows you to ask questions using the Q&A button, probably on the bottom of your screen. We will of course try to pick up and answer as many questions as we can after we have finished our presentation. And in case we're not able to answer any of the questions live, we will send you a follow-up email later on. And we are also recording this webinar and it will be available in our social media platforms later this week. So I have here today with me David Batman, who is Managing Director and Head of International for BMS Group, Jose Astorqui, who is Chief Executive Officer Latin American Caribbean for BMS Group, and my colleagues Camilo Martinez, who is Managing Partner for DLA Piper Martinez Beltran in Bogota, Colombia, and Paulo Larraín, who is a partner in corporate at DLA Piper in Chile. So today we will be speaking a little bit of what we see about the insurance impact, the impacts actually of the pandemic for Latin America. So we have a few topics that we will go through. So I think one of the main questions we have here is, what are the main challenges brought by the coronavirus pandemic for the Latin American economy in general, and specifically for the insurance sector? So please, David and Jose will pick up this one. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us.
Thank you very much, Marcela, and hello to everyone who's participating in today's webinar. The order of play, I will look at the current economic situation and what we think in the short to medium term are the implications for Latin America. And then Jose will look at the all-important implications for insurance. The challenges facing the Latin American economies, and I would make it plural, not singular, given the diversity of countries within the region, fundamentally those which are affecting the whole world, in that the COVID-19 crisis and multiple lockdowns and slowdowns in economies has hit the economies hard. And as this slide prepared, according to some bespoke research that we commissioned very recently, thanks to our friends at American Market Intelligence, as this slide shows, the region is suffering what will be at least the biggest drop in GDP since World War II, and very likely before that as well. And as you can see, every single economy we're looking at is heading into recession to varying degrees. In Ecuador, it's likely to be nearer 9% forecast fall. That could go through to Chile and Peru, which would be somewhere between 3.5% and 4.5%, it's forecast. And to benchmark that, the USA and Brazil expected to see a 5% fall in GDP, but those numbers may change and they're likely to trend towards the negative rather than towards the positive. So the reality is that some markets may not recover to pre-COVID growth until at least 2023. But the key point we'd like to make is that countries are not going to respond in the same way at the same pace, in the same way that they're going to feel the pain slightly differently. And one way that we've looked at the situation is to try and look at the resilience of countries. How quickly are they able to bounce back? How quickly can they absorb the challenge presented by COVID-19? And if we look at these numbers another way, we've developed with our friends at AMI a resilience index, which is a quite interesting way to look at the region and to see what its prospects for a return to growth or how fast that could happen will be. According to our calculations, the countries which will have the greatest resilience, Giovanni, if you could move on one, please. Thank you very much. Not quite at the level of the real star performer, according to our analysis, such as Germany, but not bad, would include Chile, Peru, even Argentina. And resilience is something we're measuring by not just the economy, but actually very practical matters like the health services, social resilience, how cohesive is a society? Does it point in the same way? Is there a common understanding of what the dangers presented by the coronavirus and how to manage it and move forward are? And also, of course, fiscal and monetary policy in the country. So, unfortunately, we believe that a key economy in the region, such as Mexico, its ability to rebound from the current crisis, and we're seeing deaths rise in Mexico at an alarming rate at the moment, our fears are that its ability to bounce back fast, once the virus is under control, is probably hampered compared to some of the other countries in the region. For example, surprisingly, despite its good fiscal monetary record, Colombia also, according to our analysis, may find it a bit tougher to recover from the current slowdown than one would perhaps have expected otherwise. So, the current crisis is affecting all economies to different extents, but it is affecting them, and there is an economic slowdown, that's clear. They won't bounce back at the same speed. Hopefully they will all bounce back. One point to mention, although Latin America is facing the same problems as the rest of the world, not least the US, Europe has had its challenges too, other parts of the world as well. It's worth mentioning, it's important to mention that Latin American economies don't tend to have the safety net that perhaps European countries, North America, some of the richer Asian countries will have, the ability to provide income support to workers unable to go to work because of lockdowns at certain points. And you know, it's difficult when large parts of populations work in an informal sector, depend on daily payment for work. It's difficult to suggest to them that they might want to stay at home for their safety when they've got to feed their families. So without dwelling too much on that point, that is something we should be conscious of. But part of the resilience or otherwise of Latin American economies is of course conditioned by the fact that governments are less well positioned to provide income support to their populations. So a challenging time. What does that mean for insurance for our industry? Over to my colleague, Jose.
Jose, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, David. So yeah, the question we are trying to answer here today is how the COVID-19 situation is going to affect the insurance and reinsurance industry in Latin America. I think from my point of view, I'm afraid to say that we are facing the perfect storm. Since 2003, 2004, we have been experiencing what we call a soft market, which is basically an excess of reinsurance offer in most lines of business, combined with a positive investment results, driving the rates down year after year. Those insurance brokers that are listening to me now will probably agree that for the last 15 renewals or so, our clients with a good loss record have been expected a reduction in premium. And we were getting used to it because we've been doing that for so long. So in 2018 and 2019, these were difficult years for most of the non-life insurers that were hit by the natural catastrophic events like Hurricane Dorian, the typhoons in Asia, Australian and US wildfires, the riots in Chile. This riot cost for the insurance and reinsurance industry around $2 billion. So these facts were basically driving the rates slowly upwards and moving the market slightly away from the soft market. No? So we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But even when some reinsurers were producing an underwriting loss, the result was supported by a very healthy investment income. We all know that the stock market boomed in 2019, so it covered part of these losses. And then we were all living la vida loca and minding ourselves, and then COVID-19 happened, and nobody expected it. So all the information we are gathering, it all says that COVID-19 could be the most costly event ever for the reinsurance industry, ever. So eclipsing natural disasters such as Hurricane Katrina in 2005, that the bill for the insurance and reinsurance industry was slightly over $60 billion, and man-made disasters like 9/11, which the final cost was around $26 billion. The CEO of Lloyd's of London, and here are his predictions, estimates that the COVID-19 cost for the insurance industry in 2020 could be as high as $107 billion. And we might tend to think, okay, this is not that far away from Katrina, and it's a one-off event. But the big difference, and that's what Mr. Neil confirms, is that this is also impacting reinsurance balance sheets because, like other events, the industry is also experiencing a massive fall in their investment portfolios. And he estimates this loss in around $96 billion. So the total bill for the insurance and reinsurance industry is going to be around $203 billion. But the interesting fact is that these are May figures, and it doesn't include the recent Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and we have just started the hurricane season. So we still have more than 6 months to go, and 2020 is already feeling like a Jumanji game. It's going to be interesting. So now we actually find ourselves in a traditional hard market. There's no doubt about it. Not only in Latin America, but all over. No, we are seeing there's been an exodus in capacity in certain line of business. Energy, aviation, surety, D&O rates are rocketing, riots and civil commotion, strike riots and civil commotion. So we in BMS, we expect an increased demand for reinsurance, initially focused on property business over the short to medium term, and across all lines of business in the long term. But so what is the big challenge for Latin America? From my point of view, this big challenge for the insurance market is how we are going to handle, or how between all of us that work in this industry, we are going to handle the hard rates scenario in a devastated economy. So while the rates are going up across all lines of insurance, apart from motor, the local economies are paralyzed, and insurance companies and the financial insured are under great stress to afford these higher rates. How is this going to be transferred to our real businesses? So as David was explaining, the resilient indexes are lower than other more robust economies. So it's going to take the Latin American economies longer to come out to the other side, and they are going to have many difficulties affording these higher rates. I think we are already seeing on both facultative and treaty renewals that the companies are canceling cover. We are seeing delinquency in premium payments, higher retention rates, and higher deductibles, and much more difficult renewals with underwriters increasing the premiums and requesting some coverage restrictions. So as I was saying at the beginning, I have no doubt we are facing the perfect storm.
Thank you, Jose. So I just, Paulo, in terms of, do you see any specific issues and challenges for Chile in terms of how insurers and clients will be affected by this downturn?
Well, yes, certainly we in Chile, of course, companies are facing the issues just mentioned by Jose, but especially in the case of Chile, remember that we just faced a very severe social crisis. As from October 19 until January, February 2020, right? We also suffer a lot of issues in connection with with this social crisis that certainly also affected the insurance companies, right? Now, in Chile, certainly the insurance company are facing and will face these challenges regarding operational issues, business continuity, right? Financial challenges, as Jose mentioned, probably will be a need to capitalize certain companies in order to meet their regulatory ratios, right? Certainly to deal with this number of claims, right, will be a challenge, right? As I said, not only because of COVID, but also because of the social crisis, right? Regulatory changes that we can talk later about this, but certainly probably will be some regulatory changes, right? There are issues that are discussed in Chile regarding whether these epidemic events should be covered or should not be covered, if they are excluded or if they are not excluded as from the policies, right? There are issues in connection with construction contracts and performance bonds or performance guarantees, right? In which if there is a breach of the construction company, right, the principal will ask for the insurance company to collect the performance bond. So it will be an issue regarding whether this is a force majeure or not event. So yes, as everyone, we have a lot of issues here for our clients, insurance companies.
Yes, I agree with you, Paulo. I think it's quite similar for Brazil, but let's hear from Camilo, his thoughts about Colombia on that.
Thank you, Marcela. I'm really sorry, I'm having unstable connection, so please let me know if you're not hearing me very well. So this is just to show you that in Colombia things are going to be tough. The internet connection, which is what we need to work in order to be able to have a rebound in the economy, is not working in the overall country. So we're facing difficult times in Colombia. I was going to mention that the first quarter for Colombia was an amazing quarter. With the numbers were amazing, growing. It was the highest growing country in South America, at least. We were doing terrifically well, and then we were struck by the coronavirus, and the government had to take measures. And of course, companies are suffering a lot. There are no business in Colombia right now. There's a full lockdown in Colombia. That has worked from a health perspective. We have one of the lowest death rates in the region. But from a business perspective, there's a huge concern in Colombia. What the World Bank is saying is that Colombia probably will face a drop in growth of 4.5% in the GDP, which for Colombia is huge. Colombia has never faced such a drop in the GDP in its history. So it is concerning. It is concerning. Now, from an insurance perspective, what we're seeing is a peak in claims in real estate leases. What we're seeing is something that has never been seen before. And of course, that's going to affect the business. There's also a branch here in Colombia that, if you're familiar with the Colombian insurance sector, you will probably have heard about it, is the mandatory traffic accident insurance. What we call it here is the SOAT, S-O-A-T. It was a very profitable branch for insurance companies here in Colombia. And of course, that is related to traffic accidents. And right now we're in a lockdown, so there are no traffic, there are no automobiles in the streets, so there is no business, and that's going to have a huge impact in the business and the results of the insurance companies in Colombia in this specific year, and probably it will continue to be the same for the next months coming, and maybe also next year. Nobody knows what is going to happen. Now we, as Paulo in Chile was saying, we of course have some issues related to construction compliance policies, because there is paralysis in construction in private and public constructions. So there is a paralysis on that business. Now, what we hope is to see a rebound in that sector, because the government has announced I believe, a very important 5G infrastructure policy that will start in the next coming months. So hopefully we will see a rebound in that business. Now, from a solidity perspective, there are no questions. The insurance business and insurance companies in Colombia are very solid. So there are no questions regarding their future. They'll be here and they'll continue to provide their services in Colombia. So that's basically a brief information on Colombia. Thank you, Marcela.
Thank you, Camilo. Yes, I think it's very concerning for Brazil as well. We've been through a deep recession since 2014, 2015. So I think we had a new president elected in 2017, so everyone was expecting 2018 to be a very good year. There were some very much needed reforms that were approved by government. It was still not, we did not have the growth expected, so everyone had their faith in 2019 being a great year for the country, but sadly COVID-19 happened, and obviously all business were deeply affected by the restrictions imposed by government due to the state of emergency that was declared. There was obviously the political crisis that's still ongoing relating to policies issued by state government, which is quite different to what the president has been endorsing. So that overall political crisis is not great for the country. I've heard in one of the seminars, one of my colleagues saying that for Brazil is just another crisis, that we live from crisis to crisis, so surely we'll get out of this one, which I really liked. I thought it was a good way of seeing. In terms of specific issues for insurers that we've been following quite closely, I think for the first few months of the pandemic, they were really looking into their portfolios, looking which lines of business they were due to be most affected by, especially in terms of loss of profits, what business interruption policies, and what they had as what they could be excluded. We're also seeing lots of insurers looking to triage claims to ensure that they have consistent responses, and the market initially had reported that they did not see a rise in the number of claims, but Obviously, they're now seeing a surge, cyber, performance bonds, and I'm sure we will see later on in liability lines of business as well. We generally feel the impacts of those claims arising a bit later on than other more mature countries like the US and the UK. So I think that's the overall general idea of what's happening for Brazil specifically. But I think it's good if we talk a bit about what we believe are going to be the main concerns for the insurance industry going forward. So Jose, I think you're going to pick this one up.
Yeah, thank you, Marcela. Following on, and I have unmuted. Following on what you have just said, I think apart from the usual business-related concerns, I think the COVID-related concerns for the reinsurance industry are mainly two. First, if Latin American domestic regulators follow the trend that we are seeing in other jurisdictions like the US and the UK and try to force the insurance industry to pick up part of the bill of the COVID-19 via an extensive interpretation of what is covered and excluded under the policy. And if that happens, I guess you guys from the LA Piper are going to have a lot of work, no, defending your clients. And but what we are hearing is that at least today is not the case in Latin America. And the second, and probably most important, is the financial strength of the insurance companies in Latin America. No, how they survive, or how they perform through this crisis. It's very early to say, but we'll see.
Thank you, Jose. Camilo, would you like to add any comments from Colombia? What's the perspective that you see? You're on mute, sorry.
Yes, it happens all the time, sorry. So unlike other sectors, the insurance businesses operate through a strict reserve regime here in Colombia. Thus, the attention of claims will not be affected. However, there will be negative pressures on the results of insurance companies, especially due to the reduction of lines that are usually very commercial, such as the SOAT that I already mentioned. Additionally, the high claim rate in insurances, such as the real estate leasing or compliance insurance, will surely imply a tightening of premiums and more difficult conditions to access these products in the future. To meet these challenges, two mechanisms can help insurance companies. One is to begin to focus on branches that will now be more central to the pandemic to improve their penetration rates in the Colombian population. A good example would be the health insurance and life insurance. And second, review subscription policies to prevent access to products in affected branches from becoming impossible for the economy, which would exacerbate the crisis in sectors. That would be basically.
Thank you. And Paula, what do you see as concerns in Chile for the insurance industry?
Well, obviously, there are a lot of concerns, right? But going back to Jose's point regarding possible regulatory changes, I think that's a main concern. And on that regard, I think that it's important to distinguish when we talk about regulators, at the end, we are talking about first Congress, then we are talking about courts, right? And then we're talking about regulatory agencies, right? Probably with regulatory agencies, we don't expect too many changes, but at the end they have to follow what Congress says, right? And regarding Congress, certainly it is uncertain what laws they can approve. Indeed, right now there is a bill of law, right, that was submitted to Congress, by which Congress or these congressmen who submitted this bill, it has not been approved yet, right? But they want to deem as unwritten any provision on the insurance policies by which pandemic events were excluded, for instance. Then also there is a discussion also in connection with imposing more restrictions or more control over the insurance company in order to impose new ratios, new financial ratios based on risk, right? That's another issue that maybe it will come up later. And regarding interpretation by courts, right? Well, in general, in Chile, if you have a claim, first you go to the regulator, right? But then you can go to arbitration. In general, arbitration are respect contracts, right? That's in general, but also you can end up in a court. And unfortunately, we are seeing a very weird way by courts in order to rule now on different issues, right? In Chile and probably in the rest of the world, we're facing that even courts are trying to amend the law in order to try to, to find what they believe is justice, right? So especially on insurance that affect people, personal insurance, right? Life insurance, car insurance, etc., or events related to pandemic, we probably will see changes, as I said, from Congress or even interpretation by courts.
Yes, Paulo, I think in Brazil it's quite similar. I think that the concerns are going to be relating to claims and potential litigation arising out of what will be understood as excluded or covered under policies. And for Brazil, we've had big pressure from an association of insurance brokers to ensure that life insurers would cover claims relating to the pandemic, even though policies expressly excluded that. And we have a concern about how that might affect court decisions in relation to other lines of business. And we're also seeing lots of bills of law coming up in Congress, forcing losses relating to the pandemic to be covered, more specifically in terms of life insurance and health insurance. But that's not the type of, that's a bit worrying, obviously, especially because one that has been approved in the first house also includes policies that have already been issued. So we think that that creates a bit of an instability, really, because you can't really have a law that retroacts because, you know, insurers have not priced or factor in that kind of coverage when they issue their policy. So I think there will be a lot of discussion in terms of court decisions or arbitrations relating to pandemic. And we're also seeing the regulator moving to a risk-based regulation, which we think is quite positive for the insurance industry, because for those insurers with a smaller operation, then they will be subject to less regulation. So I think that will create a more competitive market for Brazil. And I'm sure that insurers will also be looking at their portfolios so that anything that's non-performing, to find alternative arrangements such as runoff operations for them. So I think when we're going to look, my next question is going to be the perspective for the economy in Latin America and what opportunities that may arise out of the pandemic in terms of new products, capacity pricing. I think it will be great to hear what David and Jose have to say about that.
Thank you, Marcela. So, as we touched on earlier, the capacity for Latin American economies to bounce back and at least get to the pre-COVID GDP levels in dollar terms will be mixed. Some countries will manage it in 2022, we think. So in simple terms, when do they get back to the position that we were in January? Others, it'll take till 2023. As we learnt in the global financial crisis, which seems a lifetime ago, but it was only just over a decade ago, the countries that are hampered by existing high debt levels, and notably Argentina, Mexico, Ecuador in this context, will find it harder because they're less able to borrow money to invest and spend their way out of trouble. That's an area of concern. So it'll take at least 2 years for countries to get back on track. What does that mean for insurance? Well, Giovanni, could we actually put that opportunity heat map up, please? Thank you. So to share with our participants, part of our own analysis with our friends at AMI is to look at sectors of the economy, not all of which are necessarily going to suffer through the current crisis or indeed after. And in fact, perhaps the opposite, will bounce back. Our forecast is that in certain countries, Brazil is a good example because the government's already announced quite a lot of projects. In certain countries, one of the few levers that governments will have to kickstart economies is to step up infrastructure projects. So as you can see, we think that the opportunity for business, particularly, well, certainly including the insurers who support all the participants in these projects, will be quite good in construction. In some areas of energy, and one industry that may do even better is agriculture, for the simple reason that the price of commodities, all the way from crops, wheat and so on, and up to real mineral commodities, which Latin America exports in some large measure, is increasing. So we think there'll be more investment in those industries, more insurance requirements. In other areas, let's be frank, transportation is one, all the way from airlines to road transport, rail, and so on. Activity is way down, and these will be difficult areas. So insurance will follow the economy. There'll be more insurance opportunities available in the growth sectors, logically, and consequently less in the areas that are being hardest hit right now by economic recession. Part of the outlook for insurance will obviously be determined by client appetite and ability to pay for insurance. As Jose mentioned earlier, we are basically looking at a hard market scenario. The cost of insurance is higher than it has been for years. So although described as a perfect storm where the client is less able to pay for insurance, and yet the cost has gone up, in fact, this may lead to a shift in focus, a shift in the type of demand, and insurers must respond to that. So there may be, for example, a greater interest in parametric solutions. And in the UK, in France, in the USA, not just the private sector, but actually a sort of public-private partnership is emerging, which may look to put parametric solutions behind a layer of cover for the whole industry. So in effect, a pool solution to coping with the business interruption call on insurers for pandemics, a better way of handling problems affecting the entire industry. That's probably going to be on a national basis. Perhaps that'll be copied by some Latin American countries. But certainly, yes, an interest in parametric solutions, probably kickstarted by the public sector, by governments and regulators, rather than necessarily the private sector, is one thing. For businesses, one interesting aspect of the COVID-19 shutdowns, and this is a global phenomenon, has been a sharp increase in cyber attacks. And the reason for that is thought to be fairly simple, which is that with so many of us, with so many industries working remotely from home, basically online, like this webinar right now, the opportunities, the perceived opportunities for cyber criminals has gone up, attacks have gone up, and some of the key insurers who work in this area, such as Hiscox, for example, are saying that demand for cyber insurance is increasing quite fast globally. And we certainly feel that this will be the case in Latin America, a region where understanding of cyber insurance has been quite high, and take-up, actual purchase, has been quite low. Now, you might think that with reduced ability to buy, clients, companies, individuals may be less keen on buying cyber insurance. If they weren't doing it before, they're less likely to do it now, might be the presumption. Actually, our forecast is that sales, including to individuals, so that's, you know, ordinary people buying their own cyber insurance when they buy their mobile phone, you know, as part of the products their bank offers them, as well as companies, we think that will go up. We think that spending on private health insurance will go up. Basically, consciousness, you know, awareness of risk, of the need to manage one's own risk, personal and corporate, has gone up. That's one of the COVID-19 effects. So there are areas of the economy that will grow faster than others, and there are areas of insurance that will grow faster than others. I return to the point about parametric solutions. Let's see. They're much talked about. They were perceived to be expensive if bought by some individual companies. I think personally that if public-private partnerships lead to national solutions in one country, they'll be copied in others, potentially in Latin America as well, precisely because it is a hard market. Jose.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think parametric insurance or insurance has been a curiosity up to now. It has been in the market for some years, but it's been it's seen as a very expensive solution and very few providers in the market. But this situation is going to force us to be creative, to think outside the box. Parametric is definitely a product that has a lot of road for development. I do think as well that the private sector, I think in order to avoid all these higher premiums and deductibles that are going to strike them, or they're already striking them, they're going to look at captive reinsurance solutions. We have seen this in the past, you know, in the 90s, where especially the big four accounting firms, after a series of scandals, were struggling to find E&O cover at an affordable price. They decided just to set up some captive reinsurance solutions. And I think we are going to see a higher demand for these solutions going forward, especially for the big buyers of insurance and reinsurance. No, and also it has very interesting tax efficiency implications. And on the public sector, I think the public sector is going to struggle because due to the large reduction of income that they are suffering, especially in certain economies in Latin America, due to the drop in oil prices and also the drop in tax income. I think they're going to opt to self-insure a certain catastrophic risk. Basically due to lack of funds. No, we are already seeing it in Mexico, and we will probably see it somewhere else. And so yeah, it's time to be creative and find unusual solutions in these strange times.
Thank you, Jose. I think there was one point that my colleague Camilo wanted to cover in respect of regulatory risks for Colombia. So, Camilo.
Thank you, Marcela. Thank you, Marcela. Yes, after hearing you, Marcela and Paulo, with respect to the concern of regulatory risk, I believe it's important to share that in Colombia we're not seeing such a pressure by the government to be right now thinking on regulatory amendments. We're not also seeing pressure from third parties that are related to the insurance sector. So we're not seeing that in Colombia. However, it is important to mention that the government did already make a decision, which do show us how they are thinking and maybe what will happen in the future. And is that insurers were instructed to return the premiums for the non-continuous part of the insured risk For example, if a vehicle has not been able to circulate, which is the case, the insurer must return the premium for that period, and that has already been ordered to the insurance companies. So I just wanted to mention that and to share that information. Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you, Camilo. So now that we have discussed a bit what's happening and perspectives for the economy, I think it would be good if we talked a little bit about what are the main perspectives for the insurance industry going forward. So, David, it would be great to hear from you.
Thank you. So just to make one brief point, it's often said that a crisis is the best time for radical change. And although that sounds a rather grand statement, one aspect of the strange situation the global economy, including in Latin America, finds itself, and particularly industries, whether it's legal, insurance, or other areas of the service economy, is that, broadly speaking, most of us were sent to work from home, and yet our clients' needs were catered for, business continued, and I wouldn't say that everything carried on exactly the same as before, but the overall effect was okay. And what's the point here? The point here is that all our industries globally managed to work remotely, thanks to, you know, increased use of digital platforms of one sort or another. And what are the main perspectives for the insurance industry going forward, looking at Latin America? Well, just one thought to give you. It would seem to us that insurance companies and brokers who are better able to not only maintain, but actually build on that experience of having to work remotely at certain points, is something that should be built upon and rapidly. And the insurance companies and brokers who reach their clients through greater use of digital platforms, using artificial intelligence, you know, speeding up their service and getting products to clients at the speed the client expects, which is basically immediate, without taking away the importance of, you know, the face-to-face discussion, albeit sometimes over the internet, without taking away the ability to negotiate, the human touch, but to back up, you know, those negotiations, those discussions with immediate practical placement solutions. We think that will be critical, and the winners or losers in the insurance and reinsurance field, we strongly suspect, which will be those who had to rapidly ensure that everything was done digitally, and then make that part of their proposition internally and externally, not just having to do it because of a crisis prompted by a virus. So taking, you know, something good out of something bad, our industries have continued to work. Clients' needs have been met. That was done very much through increased use of digital platforms, and that should be something that's built on very rapidly in the go forward period.
Yeah, I agree, David. I think for Brazil, we will see a lot of that, but I will let my colleague Camilo talk about his perspective for Colombia.
Sure, thank you, Marcelo. So we're seeing opportunities. A time of economic shrinking is expected, probably during this year and the next one. In Colombia, aspects such as the devaluation of the peso and the elimination of the fiscal rule most likely have collateral effects and will make the recovery of the national economy more difficult. From the perspective of the insurance sector, it will be necessary to reinvent some branches to make them more commercial, so that the attention is no longer focused on some insurance that would probably continue to be contracted in the post-COVID period, such as the case of automobiles that I have mentioned. Coverage of pandemic events will surely be the sector's main opportunity. That's the way that we see it. In this context, what we've been able to observe is that there are some topics that should be explored by the business. The first one is insurance on issues associated with occupational hazards. They face a new reality, which involves the risk of pandemic outbreaks and the transmission of viruses as part of the occupational diseases. This is a very underexplored topic, at least here in Colombia, that can now become a central aspect in the placement of this type of insurance. The second is the personal insurance. In Colombia, there is more variety in property insurance compared to people insurance. For this reason, insurance penetration rates such as life insurance or health are very incipient, and there is an opportunity. A good challenge will be to be able to access these markets in a more structured way, and above all, a way that allows low and middle income populations to find attractive coverage in these products. That's underexplored here in Colombia. And third, loss of earnings insurance. There is a huge discussion right now regarding loss of earnings insurance. The global closure of businesses in Colombia by government orders not associated with physical damage, it's a reality. Loss of profit insurance has shown to be insufficient to deal with these situations. Without a doubt, a niche market will be to study the opportunities that in terms of loss of profits may arise. Several market makers have set about analyzing the possibility of implementing this type of products here in Colombia.
Thank you, Camilo. Paulo, what do you think for Chile?
Well, very similar, I think, to Camilo. I think that there are certain sectors that probably will create opportunities. But thinking on what David was saying regarding this new type of industry, a more digitalized industry, I think digital platforms. From the legal point of view, I think that thinking on those digital platforms, for instance, I think that the insurance industry, from the legal point of view, probably will be subject to a more strict control regarding consumer protection laws, right? That's something that is increasing in Chile. A few years ago, the insurance industry was not subject to consumer protection law, but it is now subject to those laws. And every day you see more cases. And even last year, we had the first class action submitted by a number of clients pursuant to the consumer protection law. So then I think that in this new industry, more digitalized and with digital platforms, I think that data protection law also will be very relevant. It's also an issue that we are seeing here in Chile. It's a discussion in order to comply with data protection laws, right? Especially with GDPR in Europe, etc. And Chile, we are amending our data protection law. So. And finally, at least in the case in Chile, certainly regulator will need to update rulings in connection with online hiring of policies. For instance, there is a lack of proper regulation on that. Right now, there is only one rule which regulates the online purchases of policies through a website, for instance, but just a website. So apps are not included, or these digital platforms. So certainly digital platforms will require a number of amendments on regulations and laws.
Yes, that's all very interesting to hear. I think countries in Latin America, they tend to be quite similar in terms of what's happening and in terms of opportunities in general. I think there are some discussions that brought by Camilo in terms of occupational issues relating to employment relations and digitalization. I think those are the same for Brazil. I think in terms of opportunities specifically for Brazil going forward, the government has been investing a lot in infrastructure projects as a way to recover the economy. And it was a promise that was made in his campaign. And we know that his minister, Paulo Guedes, is very supportive of those infrastructure and privatization projects. So I am sure there will be clients looking for insurance solutions and capacity from the international market in that respect. I think insurers will definitely be looking at ways of working digitally. I think for our industry, even though the in-person relationship is very important, as David mentioned, I think there is a lot that can be done remotely. So I believe that there will be some investment around digital platforms, allowing insurers to work even better in a digital world. And making reference as well to the presentation made by David, I think probably insurers will also be looking at products, innovating products that will cater for the needs of the clients that they certainly have become aware during the pandemic. And so I think there will be lots of investment in technology, business resilience to ensure their business continuity in light of possible future lockdowns until we have a solution for the COVID-19 disease. And I think because of the downturn in the economy, I believe that there will be also insurers and intermediately looking at potential consolidation alternatives, and even on the runoff space for those companies looking to exit the market or exit certain lines of business. So we will see what the future holds. But I think from our discussion, even though there will be significant challenges to overcome, I think there is obviously a positive outlook brought by David, Jose, Paulo, and Camilo. I think we are on time to end. I want to thank you everyone for joining us today. Special thank you for David and Jose, who have helped us put the webinar together. And a very special thank you as well to Camilo and Paulo for joining us and giving such interesting insights from Colombia and from Chile. It has been great to be here with everyone. So thank you. And thank you to everyone who dialed in, joined, and heard us today. And if you have any questions, then just please feel free to follow up with us. We will be more than happy to talk about what we discussed today in more detail. So thank you.